that stands for making my city a really great progressive place, and being trans is part of who I am, but it's only a really small part of me. Like, I'm a councillor that happens to be trans rather than a trans councillor. And I think any observer in Australia has seen that on the right, far right and the extreme far right, there's just been this emboldenment based on the policies that they've seen in the United States and people policies. Like, when it comes to politics, you can choose not to be too interested in it, but you can't choose not to be affected by it. It's like you don't do politics regardless. One way or another, politics will do you.
Welcome to the Trans Boss podcast, home of the Trans Boss movement, the place where empowered trans people come to discover what it takes to become the best versions of themselves. I'm your host, Jasmine Vine, a Transfem trans empowerment specialist and the CEO of Divine, and I'm here to guide you on this empowering journey. In each episode, we'll dive deep into topics that matter to us trans people, like navigating through societal challenges, as well as building resilience and embracing an empowering mindset. We'll explore it all. We'll also bring on some incredible guests who are making a positive impact in the trans community. The Trans Boss podcast is your go-to resource for empowerment, hope, wisdom, and epic stories from empowered trans bosses across the globe. It's time to kick life's ass and create an empowered, authentic you. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Trans Boss podcast. Now, today I'm really excited to welcome Paige Johnson to the podcast. Paige recently made history as the first openly transgender woman elected to public office in New South Wales, and she's also a civil engineer and the vice president of Hunter Gender Alliance, where she advocates for trans and gender diverse communities in the region. Paige is passionate about inclusivity, equality, and making real change at the local level. So, without further ado, please help me welcome my friend Paige to the Trans Boss podcast. Welcome, Paige.
Thanks for having me, Jasmine.
Thanks for coming on. I'm really excited to have this conversation. How do you
Pretty
feel?
good. Pretty stoked. My first ever podcast, actually.
Very exciting. Yeah, we were talking about that the other day. Like, you've done lots of different interviews and whatnot, but never on a podcast. So it's be interesting. So I have a few rapid answer questions, first and foremost, for people to get to know you a little bit better. So first of all, how do you identify and what are your pronouns?
Sure. Okay. My name is Paige. I'm a woman. I'm trans too. My pronouns are she and her.
Beautiful. And what is something that you believe in?
Something I believe in. I believe in hope.
Ooh, nice. And what do you want to see more of in the world?
I want to see more love in the world.
Beautiful. All right. So firstly, I want to get to know you a little bit more in terms of your transition journey and that side of things. When did you come to terms with being trans?
Okay. It was actually probably around the time I was 19 years old. But when I reflected on it, there were signs going back to as far back as kindergarten, really. In terms of how long I was dealing with it. So it was probably around the time after thinking about my gender and all this for a very long time that I guess I kind of reached a point where, after doing all these thought experiments and thinking about it, like, it was clear to me it was more likely than not I was trans. That's how I said it to myself to, I guess, make it easier to accept. But it wasn't until my early to mid 20s that I actually came out. So yeah, a few more years I was still dealing with it. Living with that and keeping that to myself. So it I probably would have been around the age of 21 when I first told another person about how I was feeling. And it wasn't until, a few years later, it wasn't until 3 years ago. So yeah, 26 when I actually came out.
Wow. Okay. So 3 years ago, we would have been in lockdown at that point, I'm pretty sure. Or maybe just getting towards the tail end of lockdown.
Yeah, well, we were in and out of it through 2020. And like, I hear like a lot of people always say that it's like the 2020s were like the first years. It was like just 3 years that sort of just disappeared. And it's just like, well, no, I'm not 29. I'm actually like 26 because I missed 3 years.
Oh, there you go. Goodness me.
Yeah, so I think during the times when we were all working from home or had lockdown, that was a lot of opportunity for self-reflection too on, like, I've heard other people talk about that as well when they're sharing their own stories. And certainly the case for me as well over those years.
Yeah. You mentioned before about thought experiments. Was there any particular thought experiments in general that helped you to come to terms with your identity?
Well, there's so many of those classic ones that you do. It's like, oh, you know, if you could press a magic button and that, like, you got to choose which gender you wanted to be, and like there was no judgment in society, or no one cared, or no one knew any different. Like, what would you do? And you know, that one's very clear. I'll be woman. I've always felt that way, and it's like, well, one of the things that I guess is an obstacle is literally almost kind of the impression of what society will think of you, and like you're not conforming to society, and that makes it like there's this pressure not to be yourself because of that. And I think that was something that I was dealing with for ages. So like back when, you know, I was a kid in like the late 90s and early 2000s, there wasn't really much representation of trans people out there in the media. The limited representation that there was, it was pretty negative, and it was almost kind of like, you know, like the butt of a joke, or like this caricature. And like it's hard to,
Family Guy and South Park
exactly.
stuff.
It's real, like as the saying goes, it's really hard to be what you can't see. And like back then, in terms of what the media was presenting about what trans people were, it was really hard to see myself like that as well, because like you see that, I'm like, well, I'm just a normal person. I'm not what that the media is saying. No, like that's not me.
Yeah, that's definitely a big obstacle. What would you say was like the biggest obstacle for you in your transition journey?
That's a very good question. Oh, what's the biggest obstacle for me? I think it was knowing when the right time to come out was. So I guess, like I said, like I'd known I was trans for quite some time before I came out, and it was, deciding when the right time in my life was, and when, not just when I was ready to do it, but when I needed to, live my truth, live myself. So that was one that was sort of on my mind, and it kind of got to the point where I was thinking about this like almost every single day, not all the time every single day or every moment of every single day, but you know, if it was 5 minutes or an hour or so, like this was on my mind quite a lot. And like once it got to that point, it's you sort of need to do something about it to be yourself.
Around the timing side, like hindsight's 2020, as they say, what advice would you have for other people who are wondering that same thing?
It's going to be okay. Yeah, like if I could go back and say that to myself, I'd say it's going to be fine. Like since coming out and affirming my gender, like basically it has been like I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm like calmer and more at ease than I've ever been in my life. It's like I can just get on with my life and just enjoy life and live happily and live normally. And if I knew it was that just that simple, and I would be so at ease and calm with it all, maybe I would have done it sooner. But so I guess if I could say anything, it'll be okay and it gets better.
Beautiful. It's so important for people to be able to see that and to see that representation, because otherwise people struggle to have hope that they are going to be okay. So I'm really glad to hear that. And I'm curious if because obviously there are a lot of obstacles, there are a lot of challenges that come as a result of just existing as a trans person in society, unfortunately. But if you could choose to be born cis, would you do it? And why or why not?
Yeah, well, I guess earlier we were talking about thought experiments, and like that's one that has crossed my mind as well too. And I think over time, like my view on that has changed. So like initially, if I was asked like, you know, ages ago, like very early after affirming my gender or just before, like I would have been like, God, like I would definitely be cis, because it's so much easier for cis people to exist in the world. But like I want to be a cis woman though. Not a cis man. But I guess as time has gone on, and like I guess been like the lived experience that I have just having affirmed my gender and sort of going through these challenges in life that come at you that way, it's kind of been important about shaping who I am as well. So like if I was cis and I didn't go through this, it's like I would be a different person. And so look, I'm proud of who I am, and yeah, like I'm proud to be a trans woman. And I suppose too with that, like when it comes to visibility as well, like, I make the decision to be visible because seeing other people being visible has like helped me so much as well. And look, you know, trans people, we're not going away. Like, we've existed all throughout human history, in every civilization, in every culture that there's ever been in human society. Trans people will always be the case.
Yeah. You know, I felt kind of similarly to that early on, I would have been like, hell yeah, if I could be born cis and like wake up as a cis woman, absolutely, I'd take it. But same, like over time, when you do acknowledge that trans people always have and always will exist, it's like some people have got to take the reins on that and like, you know, be visible and have that acceptance and try to pave a way for a better society for people in the future.
Yeah. And it's like,
that's definitely shifted.
Yeah, and it's like, well, like I didn't choose to be trans, and while it's only a small part of who I am, it's been an important part of shaping my experience with the world and just my own life. So yeah, like I wouldn't want to erase that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? When we're talking about representation, I want to know, how important do you feel trans representation is in politics?
Very, very. So I guess earlier before I talked about just how that visibility has been so important to me. And, you know, there's not that many trans people in politics, well, anywhere in the world. And there's certainly not many trans people in politics in Australia. We don't have any trans people in parliament in this country at the state or federal level. Yeah. So it's only local government so far. And I guess for my own experience here, when I put my hand up to run for office too, seeing other people in other states and other countries who have done something like this, that really helped me a lot as well. Like, that visibility is so important. Like I've seen, and this is something that normal people can do and we should do.
Yeah. And is that kind of what impact you would like to have in that space? Because I just wonder, your election to public office, what impact do you hope that will have on the next generation?
Well, I want to see more trans people run for things. So, you know, if you want to, you should run for it. Like, basically, like, as I said, trans people have always existed everywhere. And like, we don't just belong in local government, in the council chamber, we belong in parliament, in the House, in the Senate and in the cabinet. And I want to see a future very soon where that is normal for everyone, like as it should be.
Yeah, well, I mean, a government in general is supposed to reflect the diversity of its people. Like, that's my belief, was we should have a reflection of the people in our government. I wonder, because you said there's not many people that have been elected, you know, there's no trans people in parliament within Australia. I know overseas, like in the US, there's talk about, I think it's Zoe Zephyr and Sarah McBride. I'm not actually sure, are they elected just state or is that federal? I think Sarah McBride is in Congress.
Yes, so I believe Zoe is a state equivalent parliamentarian there, so in state Congress.
Yeah, right.
Sarah McBride is in the like federal Congress. So I believe the first national level politician that's trans.
Yeah, right. Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So being elected as the first out trans woman in government in New South Wales, what does that mean to you?
Sure, I guess.
Like, do you feel any pressure or responsibility along with that?
I guess there's a bit of pressure too. And what's been important to me is, like, I managed the narrative about it too, because I was very conscious that it would get like some media attention. Like, even if it is local government and like being elected to local council, or like first to get attention. And I guess what was important to me is making sure to get it early and frame the narrative. So, you know, rather than let the media make up their own story about me, I'm happy to engage with the media as well and share my views and my story. And I guess what was important to me, and like, I'll talk about the campaign a little bit too in a sec. Like, I guess framing it is that, yes, like I am a trans woman and I've been elected, but like, that's only a small part of who I am. A councillor that stands for making my city a really great progressive place, and being trans is part of who I am, but it's only a really small part of me. Like, I'm a counsellor that happens to be trans rather than a trans counsellor.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because sometimes you get pigeonholed into this kind of tokenism sort of thing of like, trans is the whole personality, and it's not. I'm pretty sure the things that I've seen you like posting about and advocating for and stuff, it's like, yeah, trans is a part of it if it's an important part of what's happening in the climate or whatnot. But you talk about all sorts of things that are relevant to a wide variety of people in the city that you represent. Like, so yeah, I think that's really important to highlight. What inspired you, like, to run for public office?
Sure. Okay. Well, I might just go back and talk about how I first got involved in politics. So, yeah. And I guess, so here in Australia, for your international audience, there's two major parties. So there's the Labor Party, which is like the progressive left-wing main party. And then there's the strangely named Liberal Party, which is the conservative right-wing party. And the word liberal is obviously inconsistent with what people in America might know, but it's sort of in terms of a reference of economic liberalism, more so than social. So anyway, when I was basically 18 years old in my final year of high school, I made a decision to join the Labor Party. So I guess, I was like, well, I'm an adult now. I'm 18 years old, so I can make decisions for myself. So I want to do that. But also here in Australia back then, would have been 2013, we had a really great progressive Labor government. Julia Gillard, our first woman Prime Minister, was leading our nation, and they had a really great progressive agenda. Particularly, I saw great stuff in the space of education policy, for example. As a student, that was important to me. And like, I saw the real difference that true progressive policy can make to people's lives. And I wanted to help make more of that happen. I wanted to be part of that. So joined the Labor Party.
Yeah.
Right. But obviously we had a change of government and election just a little bit after that. And then we had almost like the polar opposite of that. We had a very right-wing government with Tony Abbott and the Liberal Party running Australia. And I quickly learned in those years that when it comes to politics, seeing this right-wing government have this program of austerity, cutting services and pushing forward a bunch of right-wing policies, like when it comes to politics, you can choose not to be too interested in it, but you can't choose not to be affected by it. So I guess I was very reaffirmed in my mind of the decision that I needed to be involved. And I guess too, like there's, thinking of it in another way, when particularly if you're not if you're not a rich cis white male, like when it comes to politics, like if you you don't do politics regardless, one way or another, politics will do you.
Yeah, I really like that note. I'm actually writing it down. Can't choose to not be affected by it, because it's so true. I think we had this conversation, I don't remember when, but I was talking about how I've never pictured myself as like a political person. I've never been someone who's like, oh yeah, we need to go and protest these people. Like, I'll share information and stuff online, but I always felt like I wanted to separate from that, because in my mind I was like, being trans shouldn't be a political issue. But you're exactly right. You can't choose to not be affected by it. It shouldn't be a political issue, but unfortunately people make it a political issue. And so we have to
exactly, Jasmine. And this is something I've thought quite a lot about too, and it's been on my mind over even the last few years, like since basically I came out and leading up to that too. It's like, well, I never wanted my just very existence as a human being to be political, but like in the world that we live in, unfortunately that isn't a choice that I get to make, and for so many of us that isn't a choice that we get to make. It sucks a lot that it's that way, and I want to fight for a future where it isn't that way. And the way human society and politics seems to work, it is that way.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly neglected the reality of that for many years in my life, and I think there was a speech that I watched of you that helped me kind of come to terms with it, actually. It was something that you said in a speech. I was like, oh gosh.
Yeah.
Like,
And
yeah,
even
okay.
like just the whole doing speeches now and stuff like that. Like I'm still getting used to it. Like I just I still think of myself as like a normal person. Like the whole idea of like being a politician is like what? That's weird. That's weird.
Oh my gosh, far out. Especially in like trans communities, because politicians are often looked down upon because of stuff that goes on. So you're like, oh, I'm a politician now. Oh, that's funny. Now, I want to bring to mind something that's really, really relevant currently, and it's the political landscape in the US. So we know, Trump has gotten into office probably this time last month. Already has released a whole bunch of executive orders attacking trans rights left and right. And I'm just wondering, have you seen any impacts on the Australian political landscape as a result of the US landscape?
Yeah. Unfortunately we have. And it's of course the case where politics that happens in the United States affects a lot of the world, the way that that country is, and as big as it is, it does. And I think any observer in Australia has seen that on the right, far right and the extreme far right, there's just been this emboldenment based on the policies that they've seen in the United States, and people like even very extreme things, people are feeling more emboldened and more comfortable to go out and say ridiculous and extreme things like that are very much aligned with those extreme right-wing views like fascism and even Nazism. We've seen in Australia like plenty of self-described Nazis, albeit these people are few and far between on the extreme fringes of society, but we've seen them starting to become more visible than ever, and we've seen them marching in major cities and, doing, displaying Nazi symbols and things like that. In a lot of states in Australia, that there's actually a crime and it's against the law for good reason. And we've seen those people do that and been arrested and charged, as they should be. But it's...
Yeah, I saw that in my hometown recently, that in Adelaide, 30 people was, shocking
so
to see.
I think this sort of increase in just the visibility of the fascism and the right-wing extremism are no doubt it has been emboldened by what we're seeing in the United States. And I guess the politics of fascism too, like it is a very dangerous set of politics. It's the politics and it's the ideology of hate, basically. But at the same time, it is also so fragile that it can only take a foothold and it can only grow when people are divided and are silent against it. And that is why we see the tactics that they employ basically to try and other different groups of people and to split people up into small groups and target them one by one and pick them off one at a time. That's how this ideology of fascism grows and expands. So that's why it's so important that we fight back and we call it out very strongly and shut it down straight away.
Yeah. Well, that, I'm assuming, it emboldens the Australian people in general if they are more right-leaning, but then there's also politicians that are more right-leaning who are emboldened by that as well. So I know, for instance, our, people are calling her a Trump wannabe at the moment, Pauline Hanson. How would you describe Pauline Hanson? I don't know how to... I mean, a Trump wannabe is probably a good descriptor.
Yeah. Yes, this right-wing reactionary politician who's like... Pauline Hanson has been around for decades, and she's sort of had peaks and troughs and gone into politics and then gone out of politics and come back again. But every single time, it's always this different flavour of causing division. Like we've seen plenty of examples in the past that any observer would say has racist undertones and very harmful language and divisive language, basically employing those tactics of trying to pick a group and basically generate hate against a particular group. So that's another example of some politicians that are employing these tactics of dividing people up and causing division. It's very disappointing that there are people in elected office in Australia that do that. But the positive thing I always remember is that these people are very much on the extreme fringes. Like in the case of Pauline Hanson and the One Nation Party, they're not a major party. They'll never be a major party. They're very much a right-wing protest party, albeit, and like they're capable of causing a lot of disruption, but they do not represent the views of, you know, ordinary Australians.
Yeah. And you know what? Actually, the difference between the US landscape and the Australian political landscape is that elections are mandatory here in Australia. It's mandatory to take part in them, whereas in the US it's not. So we get a more accurate view of what the Australian population believes politically, right? Is that the effect of that?
Yes. We do have relatively good voter turnout compared to countries like the United States. And like I saw not too long ago an example of like it the amount of people that stayed home in America, if only just a small fraction of those people came and voted one way, like it was something like 5%, the outcome could be very different. Like Donald Trump wouldn't have been elected. And I've seen examples of past elections in America where it's like the leading candidate was the people that didn't vote. So,
yeah. I think that was the case this year too. It was like, if the people that didn't vote, if that was another candidate, they would win. Which is interesting. Because I'm pretty sure here we get fines if we don't vote. Like, it's actually a thing. We're very much encouraged to vote.
Part of your civic duty, part of your democratic duty. And look, I think that's a good thing for democracy because it encourages everyone to participate and it makes it clear that it's part of your responsibility, you know, as a citizen of Australia to participate in our democratic process. And I think when it comes to democracy, the more people that are engaged, the better. That's the whole concept of democracy, is that of the people, by the people, and for the people. The people get to have the say.
Yeah, it's a good point. People need to show up in order to have a democracy.
Yes,
now I want to go back to
just like basically that concept of like, you know, if you didn't vote, if you didn't participate, you can't complain about the outcome.
Yeah, true. So coming back, so my phone's just yelling at me. It's going, it's 1 o'clock. It's time to take your iron supplement. Goodness me. And I won't edit that out either because we just have conversations and sometimes things happen. Now, I want to come back to the political climate in Australia and to people like Pauline Hanson, because I'm pretty sure this isn't a new thing. Like, Pauline has called for a national inquiry into the treatment of trans youth a number of times, like maybe 5 times, I think. And it's been turned down every time. So she cites other locations, like she cites things in the UK or things in other countries and whatnot as evidence that we should shut it down and not allow people to access treatment. What are your views on that?
Well, I saw an interview on it was Sky News, the Murdoch media, of course. Thank you for sending me that recently, Jasmine.
Which I think is like the US equivalent. That would be like the Fox News, right? Yes,
pretty much. And
okay.
Yeah, we'll chat about let's chat about News Corp, because that is a huge problem in Australia and democracies around the world, in my view. But to answer your question about Pauline Hanson's recent comments, like I guess she referenced the Cass review, which is like, it's obviously an example in the United Kingdom that we've seen, but it's also another example of when conservative governments and politicians don't like what the medical professionals, the experts, and even the lived experience of trans people, when like people with experience and expertise in this have to say, they will then go and commission their own review to say what they want, or simply ignore what reviews say altogether that are independent. So when it comes to, I guess, the Cass review, it's been widely debunked, and for quite a few reasons. Well, it didn't involve trans people and the lived experience of trans people on the review panel that was putting it together. It also ignored a lot of the a lot of what the expertise of medical professionals treating trans people had to say about it as well. And it also doesn't apply to the Australian context at all. It's an example of the United Kingdom, and it has no bearing on how we do things here in Australia. It's not hard to debunk it. Like, if you simply just Google Cass review debunked or Cass review disinformation, you'll see a lot of information about that, identifying the flaws behind that review, including like a lot of people directly involved with the review that have ties to anti-trans lobby groups and organizations, including some people that have like gone to America into Florida to give evidence to some of the anti-trans happenings there with like the government in Florida when they wanted to and have taken away healthcare for trans people. Like people involved with that review were also involved with that. So there's a lot of these anti-trans lobby groups that are working closely with right-wing politicians to basically fabricate reasons why trans people should be denied healthcare. It's ridiculous, but it's concerning. Like we've seen another example very recently here in Australia. So here in Australia in the last month, really. So the Queensland government, a new right-wing Liberal Party government there, has announced that they're going to basically take away gender affirming care for trans young people in the state that's publicly provided. So
Hello, lovely. If you like what you're hearing so far, and I hope you do, then you are going to love the free trainings that I have. So these trainings have helped hundreds of my own clients and my followers get into a place of empowerment, loving their authentic selves with more hope, comfort, confidence and safety, and that is really what we're all about here. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's something for you, trans or not, whether you're interested in trauma healing or learning to live a more empowered life, in control life, or if you're just sick of your voice getting you misgendered, then these trainings break down my core methodologies to help you with all of that and more, and it's the methodologies that I use with all of my clients. So you can register for that via the link in the description box below, and I will see you there. Mwah. Now let's get back into the episode.
So not just a year ago, there was an independent review which did directly involve all the necessary medical experts that found that the gender service in that state actually should be supported and it should have its resources expanded because the job it was doing was found to be very important. And we have seen an example of then a new right-wing government has come in and said, actually, we're not going to listen to that review at all. We're going to go and commission our own review and pick and choose who's going to be part of that review, presumably so it says exactly what we want. And in the meantime, we're going to pause healthcare for trans youth while we wait for that review that says what we want it to say. That's completely ridiculous, but it's the case that we have seen time and time again. It's this tried tactic that the anti-trans lobby and right-wing politicians are continuing to implement. And we've also suddenly seen nationally too, there's an independent review into trans healthcare happening here in Australia that the medical experts are going to be involved with. However, what we've seen already is calls from those on the right basically to say that they're not going to listen to that review, and a new review, even though this one's only just started, but a new review with their own chosen people should be done, including, we've seen that sort of rhetoric from the likes of Pauline Hanson and other people in those circles too. So it's very disappointing to see. And it's also very disappointing to see that this is being spread, particularly in right-wing media here in Australia as well. Yeah, News Corp.
I definitely want to ask you about that. When you say Murdoch media, what do you mean?
Well, the media that's been controlled and is owned by Rupert Murdoch and the Murdoch family and the News Corporation companies. In Australia, a good example is Sky News and a bunch of other things like news.com.au. And if you look at that media and what comes out from that, you see so many examples of the same sort of misinformation and disinformation that we've seen in America and also the UK as well, not just for trans people as well, but trans people is a good example that we're talking about right now. Those sort of examples that we've just talked about, basically spreading disinformation as fact, is happening and it's being perpetuated by this right-wing media. And it's, in my view, it flies in the face of journalistic integrity, but we are seeing that continue to happen by the Murdoch press.
Yeah, well, I think one of the hallmarks of fascism is having a single entity owning the media and what gets disseminated to the people. And we don't have that fully, but they've certainly got a
Yes,
foothold.
and it's very unfortunate because we see that in the media, and maybe it starts with disinformation from a very small amount of people that are behind it and associated with the anti-trans lobby, but then that is spread in media or in traditional forms of media like TV and news, like we see with the Murdoch press, but then it also gets its way onto social media as well. And then the disinformation amongst everyone else then turns into misinformation when people, like, they genuinely see it and they might believe it when it started off with harmful intentions, and they see it and the story is so explosive or so reactionary that it's like, oh, who would make this up? It must be true. And then they go and spread that and tell all their friends about it or share that on social media. And then the misinformation continues to spread the lies that came up with by a small group of people. So I think that's why in Australia we need much stronger anti-vilification laws to counteract that. Would have been actually, I think in 2023, prominent Australian Georgie Stone gave a speech to the National Press Club basically touching on that topic about why it's so important. Encourage people to look it up and check it out. It's a really powerful, important speech.
Yeah, right. Georgie Stone, she was a Olympic gold medalist, I think.
Star and Neighbours, and I think Victorian Australian of the Year.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting it totally mixed up. I know who Georgie Stone is now. I remember. I was getting it mixed up with someone else. So she did a speech. Do you know what it was?
Yeah,
I can put
National
it in the show
Press
notes
Club
for people.
I think it would have been sort of mid 2023, maybe April 2023.
Yeah, nice. Okay. So yeah, that's important to learn more about. I do just want to clarify for listeners as well, from what I'm understanding, the difference between disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation sounds like it's intended to cause harm. We know that this is incorrect, but we're sharing it as, for some sort of reason, to whether it's political gain or social change or whatever. And then misinformation is pure ignorance, like they just don't know any better.
Yes,
that right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of putting it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. You're right. That does it does spread not in a very nice way. So the golden question here is, how can we keep this sort of stuff out of Australian politics, like keeping Trumpism out of Australian politics? Because Trumpism, it does thrive on misinformation. It thrives on division. It thrives on attacks on marginalised communities. So what role can local politicians, activists, and also just everyday Australians play in preventing these ideologies from taking hold in our political system? That was a bit of a mouthful.
No, it's a very good question, and I guess there's many answers to it, and there's action at all those levels that you just mentioned that are so important when it comes to like the legislative environment, like we just talked about. Things like anti-vilification laws and laws against disinformation are really important. And like holding media outlets to account that spread that, and the framework that's in place to do that certainly needs to be strengthened. Likewise, when it comes to social media, like in Australia, we have a e-safety commissioner that is very important in terms of moderating like hateful content that we've seen previously on social media, and having strength there is also important. That needs to happen. Like the sort of stuff that we've seen America, like to an extent we've got laws to protect us against some of it, but we don't have laws to protect us against all of it. So certainly more needs to happen in that space too. I guess when it comes to people and the community, like it's so important in terms of standing against that politics of fascism that seeks to divide us, is this idea and of this practice of us having solidarity. We need to all come together across our diverse and intersectional communities to stand against that happening. And that means every time that there's like an attempt to import some of the nonsense that we're seeing in America or other places overseas where the right are running loose, is that we as a community stand up against it with overwhelming force. So like, for example, that we have seen when not just only a week or so ago, when the Queensland government, like we've just talked about, announced that they're going to basically implement this ban on healthcare for trans youth, like taking inspiration from overseas. Across Australia, in more than 22 cities and towns, over 16,000 people came together and rallied against that and protested against that. And we've shown that there's a very strong message against that. And if any other governments try anything like that, they'll be met with the same force, if not greater force, of the community coming together and fighting back against them. So we need to keep up the pressure and keep doing that. And like at the end of the day, people power makes a difference.
Now, I want to ask around that, because as someone who has considered herself very apolitical in the past, and that's kind of shifting, what would you say to someone who's like, oh, I just don't want to get involved in that politics stuff? Like, yeah, people are going and, rallying against this or whatever. I just want to get along with my life and do my day-to-day things. What would you say to those people?
If you don't do politics, politics will do you. But no, I do get that though, Jasmine, because like I was saying earlier, like I want to do that too. Like I want to just get on with my life as well. Like I don't want my whole existence to be political. Like I guess it's like I'm technically now a politician, but like I want to be focusing on doing great things for my city. Like I want to be improving our infrastructure. Like I'm a civil engineer in my background. Like I want to be literally building a great city, but we like, it's hard to do stuff like that as when your human rights aren't under attack as a distraction. And like for so many of us in day-to-day life, that's affecting us too. And I guess to your question about, like, well, we want to get on with our day-to-day lives. Absolutely. We should try to do that. But yeah, like if these right-wing politics and this fascism continues to take hold and expand, the people that it continues to affect, that list continues to grow. So right now it's trans youth in Queensland, but there's many other groups in society that, like we've seen in America, a lot of, like in so many states now, women don't have the right to choose what they do with their own bodies, because we've seen a right-wing sort of consolidation of power in the Supreme Court over there and in local state legislatives and politicians over there that are emboldened by basically this train of fascism and right-wing politics. If they push forward with part of the conservative agenda and it isn't met with opposition and they don't have to backtrack, then other people see that and are like, let's do that. And then they push for the next thing, then the next thing, and then the next group gets targeted, the next group gets targeted, and the next group gets targeted. And then suddenly it gets to a point where it snowballs to more than 50% of your population or more is being oppressed by these policies that are about basically controlling people, restricting our freedoms. Like it's almost like it's just like the politics of being against happiness. Like it's like I just want a world where we can all just be happy and just live normal lives and just exist. And it's like, I don't know, like it seems to some on the far right that's like a bad thing, like being happy and just having a good society is bad. I know.
Unacceptable. Can't be happy, goodness gracious. I'm hearing a lot of that in America at the moment, where people are saying they go after certain minority groups, and if they get a good reception to that and they are allowed to do that, then they go, okay, so then we can push for this, and then we can push for this, and then for this. And then all of a sudden the people that are apolitical and going, I'm just, whatever, getting on with my lives, all of a sudden their rights are taken away, and they're like, hold on, when did that happen? And you're like, well, it started with the black trans sex worker. Like it started with these marginalized communities that we don't pay attention to, and now it's caught up with you and now you care. Which is, it's interesting. It's very interesting how that happens. But for those people as well, I want to know, because I'm speaking particularly from my younger self here, I would get so burnt out with activism, and I would really struggle to stay in that space. Like I was making YouTube videos and stuff. I was talking about my experience and being on panels and doing all sorts of things in like my teenage years. And then at a certain point, I snapped and went, you know what? I am just going to go into stealth. I'm going to hide away. And I I didn't post online for like 4 years. I didn't tell anyone in my life that I was trans. Even my housemate didn't know that I was trans. Like I kept it under wraps. And after a while, I realized that I couldn't do that anymore because I really want to help people and I need to be open and out about myself to do that. But for that version of myself who's just exhausted and burnt out, do you have any advice for that version?
Sure.
That person?
And look, I have felt this too over the years, like fighting this fight, like it does get exhausting sometimes. Like it does get so tiring. It's like, you know, why do we have to fight for our human rights? Like what?
And it feels like there's always more. Like that's what can be
exactly. But I guess part of it is remembering that, like, what we're up against, while it may seem like there's powerful forces, you know, with very regressive agendas, like particularly when it's backed by big things like the Murdoch media, it's like the people behind this are a very few and far between on the extreme fringes of society. Like they do not represent the majority, anywhere near the majority. The overwhelming majority of people just want people to be happy. So like those people on the extreme fringes that are putting this out, a tiny minority. There's more of the people than they are of those people. And I remind myself too that hope is always stronger than fear. And if we do have hope, that's what drives us to action. So I always want to make sure that other people have hope too. So, you know, when I'm out there speaking too, like I always make sure to have a positive message too, because like at the end of the day, like, there is a positive future to look forward to. Like and history will show that like people that want a more inclusive society are always on the right side of history. Like that human society in history has shown us that very well. And we've seen plenty of times what happens with fascism, the terrible things that happens, but also the end result. At the end of the day, hope always wins, and it should. So yeah, that's the future that I want to fight for, and I think that's the future that we're all in the fight for in like many different ways, whether they're big or small contributions or you know, just like you don't need to be a politician to be contributing to a better future. Like it could just be conversations that we're having with our friends. It could just be staying positive and staying in touch with your community and just spreading joy and happiness in the world. Like that is an action in and of itself. Basically, anything.
Yeah. I've got a couple of directions that I want to take with that because, you know, I've got a funny story, but I'll save it for after this bit. The fight for a better future, I even did a masterclass on this a couple of years ago. I did a class where I spoke about fighters versus creators and like what is the difference between someone who's fighting versus someone that's creating. And my view back then, I don't know if it's shifted at this point, but my view was that we need more creators, like people that are there who are building inclusive systems, who are building safe spaces and creating more empathy, more compassion, and more space for that to exist. And then the fighting is more like what's happened in Queensland recently, you know, the ban on the pause on puberty blockers, and the fighting is more like this has happened and I'm reacting to this, I'm standing up to this. Now, a couple of years ago, I don't think I would have done what I've done recently because we were at a rally together, right? And
you spoke amazingly, by the way.
This is where I heard one of your awesome speeches.
You spoke amazingly.
Thank you. Funny story about the speech, actually. I wrote it the night before. It was like 10 p.m. and I had got the speech all written, and I went into my partner's room and I was like, okay, I'm going to read this out and I want you to give me some feedback. And I went through the whole thing and she was like, oh, Jasmine. I was like, what? What's wrong with it? And she was like, where's the hope? And I looked at it again and I was like, crap. I have spoken about the issues and the difficulties growing up with, you know, lack of access to gender affirming care and all of that. But I forgot to add that hope piece in that you were just talking about. And so I shifted it and added that in, which I hope worked. I was a little bit nervous, but yeah, that piece is so important to add in. And I had a little bit of a laugh at myself because I was like, for someone who considered herself so apolitical and who's never been in this thing, I'm like, you mother truckers are like getting into this speech and getting all angry with it. So I thought that was kind of funny. it was less hopeful the night before. But yeah, the fighting, creating side of things, I think I view it a little bit more balanced than I used to, because I think both sides are very much necessary. And for me, I think it was actually avoidance. I was avoiding the fighting side of it because I felt so exhausted by that in my past. And I'm even struggling with it now, where I'm like, because I've got a lot of American friends and clients and all of that, and having them being attacked so consistently with all these executive orders and everything, it's really affected my mental state and my mindset as well, just seeing that and feeling like being political is not a choice. So how do you manage your energy when it comes to that?
How do I manage my energy? I think, I don't let it keep me awake at night, I guess. I do my best to concentrate on the fights that I know are worth fighting and that I can win. And I guess I'm conscious about what is happening, and I am very mindful of, I guess, the threats to not just our human rights, but our democracy out there as well. And I'm very mindful of it. But I make sure I spend my energy on countering it in ways that I know can have an impact too. But look, it's so different for so many people. Like it might be different for me if I was living in the thick of it in America too. This sort of stuff, it does get to people at their core, and it's really hard to live with directly having your human rights taken away. And I think we are very lucky that we are living here in Australia, where we are spared the worst of it so far, and we're doing our bits to fight to make sure that stuff does not come here. But and I guess seeing what is playing out overseas is more of the reason why we direct energy to fight against that sort of stuff coming here too. So I try not to let it keep me up at night, and I try not to think about it too much. But I guess, in this age of social media, it's very hard to shut that out. Like if you're just literally scrolling through Instagram or anything, and you see a lot of it, you see a lot of that happening, and your mind does think about that a lot. So I think it's important to be very conscious of what's happening and the threats that are out there, but also it's still important that as human beings we enjoy our lives and have a good time too. So I spend time with friends, and I do things that don't relate to this politics as well too. So I guess I spread out my energy, and I guess part of it too, it's like my mind, I think about this a bit, and it's like sometimes I think that the fascists and these people, they want it to live rent-free in my mind and live rent-free in our minds too, because then that affects our quality of life too if we're thinking about it all the time. So I kind of don't let that happen, because I feel like that would help them win, and I don't want them to win. So that's why I don't let it get the better of me.
It affects our capacity to fight back.
Those psychological tactics of literally taking happiness from the world.
And I think over in the US with all those executive orders and everything, part of me thinks that perhaps that's designed to overwhelm and to get people feeling numb and
exactly. That's a really good point, Jasmine. It's like there's this sort of scattergun approach with a perfect example that you've just given with 40 plus of those executive orders, and it's so many of them are completely probably unenforceable, unconstitutional, illegal, despite some initial attempts to enforce them, and now judges are blocking them overseas. But because there's so much of it, it's well, what is the media going to report on? They can't report on 40 different stories. They have to pick and choose. So some of them fall through the cracks and don't get the criticism and the pushback that they deserve. When there's I think it is a deliberate political tactic that they're employing to basically create so much outrage and so many issues that some will make their way through, and some will escape the criticism that they should, because there's so much noise out there.
Yeah, that's an aspect that I hadn't considered actually with the media coverage side of things, because I was thinking more, if you're attacking all of these different marginalized communities at the same time, how do you have a concerted focus for human rights? How do you stand together and band together against those things if you're all prioritizing the different spot fires that are scattergunned all out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, the media side of it adds another layer of complexity to that.
Yeah, and that's exactly why solidarity across all of our communities is so important. You know, the sort of right-wing politics affects us all in different ways, and they are targeting us with different mechanisms. But at the end of the day, they are targeting all of us in different ways. So they want us to be, I guess, divided because they fear what will happen if we all are standing in solidarity. It's like it reminds me of a good example of unionism and this graphic out there that I've seen before, that basically it's like one big fish can eat a little small fish, but like if all the small fishes team up in a big group, then they scare away the big fish.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You have given me a lot to think about because I am reassessing my whole idea around this whole fighting creating thing that I've spoken about for years, because I'm now realizing that a lot of it is avoidance on my part. I always said, like, yeah, I'll support the fighters, but I want to create these things, and you know, if I'm able to generate a decent income and whatnot, I'd be able to funnel money into supporting their cause, and you know, so I can lift it up indirectly, I suppose, indirectly, without actually being a part of it and having to be at the brunt of it. So yeah, I'm realizing now there is no war in Ba Sing Se is what I've been doing. The Avatar kind of quote. So I'm going to think about that. One thing that I haven't asked you about at all is you're also the vice president of Hunter Gender Alliance. Is there anything that you want to say from that perspective? Because it's kind of like more of like an activism organization, right?
So here in New South Wales, Hunter Gender Alliance is basically an organisation that advocates for trans and gender diverse people in the Hunter region. And, you know, it's great to have groups like this in terms of being able to but basically provide a voice in terms of advocating on behalf of the trans community, not just in terms of like the political fights, but also making sure that we have access to the like healthcare that we need and things like that too. And I guess initially those were the principles that Hunter Gender Alliance was founded on, in terms of supporting healthcare for trans people here in the Hunter region. And I guess probably more so because of the need over the last few years particularly, there's definitely been a lot more advocacy and activism that HGA has got involved with. And like basically it's just about like supporting the trans community and making sure that we all deserve to thrive, and that's what it's all about. And you know, that's why we're in this fight to like trans people deserve to thrive, trans youth deserve to thrive, and make like we have a future and we're going to fight for it. Like that's really important.
Yeah, remember that was my favorite line in the speech that you did recently. That if anyone's I think it's on your Instagram or somewhere, go watch it, people. It's very interesting. It's a good speech. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. We could probably talk for ages about all of this stuff, but I'll start to wrap up here. Where can people go to learn more about you and the things that you're doing?
Okay. Well, my website is paigejohnson.info. My Facebook is paigejohnson.newcastle. My Instagram is paigejohnson.2300, which is the postcode for Newcastle. And if you go to my website, you'll be able to find my link tree and check out where you can follow me on socials. So yeah.
I'll make sure that the links for that are in the description below. One last question for you. If you were to go back to your younger or closeted trans self and give them 30 seconds of advice, what would it be? Stay strong. It's going to be okay. The future is pretty good. Yeah. Like, you'll be happy and you'll have a great life. So, basically, it'll be okay and it'll get better. So, Beautiful. Short and sweet. And I guess at the start too, you asked me, I guess, like, what do I believe in, and what's the other question? It was like, what do I want to see more of? So like, I said hope, because hope is so important, and it's much stronger than fear, and that we've seen. And in terms of what I want to see more of, like I said, love, because love wins. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you very, very much for having this conversation. It's been absolutely epic. And I think that is all from us for this one. So always remember that you are loved. You have the ability to create a happier, more empowered future version of yourself. So go out there and do it. And until next time, thanks for watching and bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Trans Boss podcast. If you support the Trans Boss movement, it would help immensely if you could leave a review on your favorite podcasting app, follow us, and share your biggest takeaway from this episode on social media. Don't forget to tag me at jasmine.vinee on Instagram because I would love to see it. Now get out there, do the things, and take the next step into that empowered life you deserve. See you next time.